Emma Collins pressed her back against the cold wall of her dorm room, her hands trembling as she stared at the message glowing on her phone screen. Her mother, Margaret Collins, had collapsed that morning and had been rushed into intensive care. The doctor's words echoed in her mind with brutal clarity. The surgery was urgent. Her mother's heart would not survive without it, and the cost was $100,000 to be paid within a week. Emma's pulse raced, her body felt hollow, and the weight of the world seemed to crush her. 100,000 might as well have been $1 billion. She could barely afford food, let alone buy her mother's life. The dormitory was dim, lit only by a weak lamp over scattered textbooks, empty cups of noodles, and wrinkled uniforms. Outside, laughter rose from the courtyard as students celebrated the end of exams, their carefree voices piercing through her fragile silence. Emma buried her face in her hands, fighting back tears. She had studied, worked, and fought to smile for her mother, but now she faced a wall too high to climb. She whispered into the emptiness, begging for her mother's life, knowing she had no one else in the world. Across the city, Nathaniel Hayes stepped out of a sleek black car in front of a skyscraper that bore his family name. At 28, he was the youngest CEO in the history of Hayes Global, admired and feared in the ruthless world of business. His tailored suits and sharp gaze commanded silence in every boardroom. His empire stretched across continents, yet his heart remained unreadable. Locked behind discipline and control, Nathaniel walked into the marble lobby with power in every stride. Heads turned, whispers followed, but he noticed none of it. To the public, he was the perfect symbol of success. To those who tried to know him, he was a storm locked behind glass. 2. Lives separated by wealth and circumstance were moving closer without realizing it. Emma was desperate to save the only family she had left. Nathaniel was untouchable in a world of power, yet fate was already weaving their threads together. One night with him could mean her mother's survival, but the price would be more than money. It would cost her innocence, her pride, and perhaps her heart. Emma's days began before sunrise and ended long after midnight. She served coffee in a small cafe where the bitter scent of burnt beans clung to her clothes. Customers barely looked her in the eye, and tips covered only a few meals. After class, she tutored children from wealthy families who mocked her second-hand shoes, but their parents paid just enough to keep her going. At night, she played piano in a dim lounge, her fingers pressing worn keys, the music flowing without emotion. Each job a fragile thread holding her life together, every paycheck already gone before it arrived. On campus, she lived in the shadows of privilege. Other students carried sleek laptops and designer bags. She carried patched notebooks and unpaid bills. Whispers followed her in the halls. Poor girl, always working, always tired. She never responded. She swallowed the humiliation and forced a faint smile, pretending their words did not wound her. But late at night, with a cup of cheap instant ramen in her hands, loneliness wrapped around her like a chain. She dreamed of studying without fear of eviction, of living without counting coins, of surviving without the threat of tuition debt. The only reason she kept going was her mother. Margaret Collins had raised her alone after her father's death, pouring every ounce of love into her. Even in sickness, she smiled and told Emma she was stronger than life's cruelty. Emma believed her and lived by those words. The bond between them was unbreakable, stronger than hunger and despair. Every sacrifice Emma made was for her mother's smile. But that smile was fading in a hospital bed, and the thought tore at her chest until it hurt to breathe. One afternoon during a lecture, exhaustion finally conquered her. After a double shift the night before and skipping breakfast to afford medicine, her body swayed. The professor's voice turned into a distant echo. Students chuckled as her pen slipped from her hand. Then her vision darkened and she collapsed against the desk. Gasps filled the room. When she opened her eyes, she lay in the nurse's office with a damp cloth on her forehead. The nurse frowned and warned her that she had fainted from exhaustion and malnutrition and could not keep living like this. Emma forced a weak smile and insisted she would be fine, though deep inside she knew she was breaking. Still, she refused to stop, because stopping meant giving up on her mother, and that was unthinkable. The world might call her the poor girl, but Emma would rather be poor than heartless. What she did not yet know was that her relentless fight had already drawn the attention of someone whose world was the complete opposite of hers, someone whose eyes had already lingered on her longer than she realized. The lecture hall buzzed, with restless energy as students waited for a guest speaker they had only read about in magazines. The tall doors opened, and silence spread through the room like a wave. Nathaniel Hayes stepped inside, his tailored navy suit catching the sterile light, his presence commanding instant attention. Professors hurried forward to greet him. Students whispered his name in awe. He was not someone anyone expected to see on a university campus, yet here he was, the billionaire CEO who had conquered industries before the age of 30. He walked, with quiet authority, every step measured, every glance sharp. Young, impossibly successful, untouchable. To the students it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to hear from him, and they leaned forward eagerly, pens ready, notebooks open, desperate to capture his words. At the back of the hall, Emma Collins sat hunched over, her hair falling across her tired face. Her pen trembled in her hand as she tried to focus, but her stomach was empty, her head heavy, and her heart carried the crushing weight of hospital bills. She did not care that a billionaire had entered the room. She only cared that her mother might not live long enough for her to find the money. Nathaniel's gaze swept across the room as he reached the podium. His voice was deep and steady as he spoke about leadership, markets, and risk. Every student hung on his words, intoxicated by the aura of wealth and power. Yet as his eyes scanned the hall, they paused briefly. At the back, he saw a girl who looked different from all the rest. Frail, pale, fighting to stay upright. She did not look at him the way others did, not with admiration or awe, but with an exhaustion that seemed to consume her. She looked as though she was barely holding herself together. For a moment his words faltered, but he pushed forward, keeping his composure while her image stayed in his mind. After the lecture ended and the crowd dispersed, Nathaniel stepped into the corridor. His assistant handed him documents, but his focus drifted when he heard a muffled voice nearby. He slowed his steps and turned the corner. Emma leaned against the wall, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice shaking as she whispered into the receiver. She was pleading with the hospital, begging for more time, telling them her mother's surgery was everything, that she would find a way to pay if only they could wait. The harsh reply on the other end was loud enough for Nathaniel to hear. 100,000, 1 week, no exceptions. Emma covered her mouth to stifle a sob, her body trembling, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Nathaniel stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he watched her crumble. He had heard desperation before in negotiations, but never like this. This was not about business. This was survival. He should have walked away. He had no reason to care, yet something kept him rooted to the spot. The sight of her, fragile yet fighting, stirred something deep inside him, something he had long buried beneath years of discipline and control. That night the piano lounge was warm with low lights and the faint scent of perfume. Music filled the air, not from a recording but from the hands of a young woman seated at the upright piano in the corner. It was Emma. To most of the patrons she was nothing more than background music, a shadow filling silence with melody. But to her every note was survival. She played for her mother's life, though no one there knew it. Her hands moved with practiced grace, yet her fingers trembled, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Nathaniel entered quietly with 2 business partners, their laughter commanding attention from waiters and guests, but he did not follow them to the bar. His eyes locked immediately on the girl at the piano. He recognized her at once, the poor student from the lecture hall, the girl he had overheard begging for her mother's life. Now she sat in a borrowed black dress, her back straight, her music steady, but the shadows beneath her eyes betrayed the truth. He walked closer, his polished shoes clicking against the floor until he stood beside the piano. Emma's fingers stiffened when she realized who was watching her. She stumbled over a note but forced herself to continue. Under her breath she muttered, "Not here, not now." But her hands kept playing. Nathaniel waited until the final chord faded before he spoke. "You work here." His voice was calm, almost gentle. She didn't look at him. "I work everywhere I can. she replied flatly, her pride wrapped around her words like a shield. He studied her in silence before asking, "Why do you push yourself this way? You collapse in classrooms and still you play into the night." Her hands froze on the keys, her body tense under his steady gaze. Finally, she whispered, "Because if I stop, she dies. My mother needs surgery. It costs $100,000. If I can't pay, I lose her." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, the noise of laughter and clinking glasses fading into nothing. For him, the world had narrowed to the trembling girl in front of him, the girl who would rather break herself than surrender. He leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "One night with me and I'll give you $100,000. Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock, her lips parting but no words escaping at first. Then her face flushed with rage. "What did you just say?" He did not flinch. "You heard me. One night, and your problem disappears." She stood abruptly, the bench screeching against the floor. "How dare you? Do you think money buys everything? Do you think I'm so desperate I would sell myself?" Her voice shook with fury, but her hands trembled even more. Patrons turned to watch, whispers spreading across the room. Nathaniel remained calm, his eyes steady. "You said your mother will die. I'm offering you a way to save her." Emma's throat tightened, humiliation burning hotter than her anger. She grabbed her bag and stormed past him, her heels clattering against the polished floor as tears stung her eyes. Outside the lounge, she gasped for air, her chest aching as she whispered to herself, "I will never sink that low. I will find another way." But as she stumbled into the cold night, her phone buzzed again. The hospital reminded her the deadline was approaching. Without payment, her mother's surgery would be canceled. Emma hung up, her legs weak beneath her. In the reflection of a shop window, she saw her pale face, the hopeless girl staring back. The image of her mother lying helpless in a hospital bed filled her mind. She pressed her hand over her mouth and whispered, "What choice do I have?" Emma walked the city streets for hours that night, torn between pride and desperation. Every step echoed the same thought. If she did nothing, she would lose her mother. If she accepted Nathaniel's offer, she would lose herself. By dawn, her eyes were swollen from crying, her body weak from exhaustion, yet her mind still churned with the impossible choice. She found herself back at the lounge where the night had ended in fury. The lights inside were dim, the chairs neatly arranged. And in the far corner, Nathaniel Hayes sat alone, his posture composed as if he had been waiting. Emma froze in the doorway, her heart pounding. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Nathaniel stood and walked toward her, his expression unreadable. "You came back," he said softly. Her voice cracked as she answered, "I don't have a choice." The city glimmered beneath a velvet sky as Nathaniel's black car carried Emma away from the familiar streets of her fragile world. She sat stiffly in the leather seat, her hands clenched together, her gaze fixed on the blur of neon lights racing past the window. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to open the door and flee into the night. But the thought of her mother lying pale and helpless in the hospital kept her in that seat. Nathaniel sat beside her in silence, his sharp profile illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard, looking every bit the untouchable man she had seen in magazines. Yet now he was close enough to touch. The car stopped in front of a towering glass building, its windows reflecting the stars. Inside the penthouse, everything gleamed. Chandeliers spilling golden light over polished marble floors, walls adorned with art worth more than Emma had ever imagined. She hesitated at the entrance, her worn shoes squeaking against the immaculate tiles, the contrast between her world and his striking like a blow. Nathaniel watched her quietly, his gaze steady, his presence filling the space around them. "This is the world I built," he said evenly. "Tonight it is yours." Emma turned sharply, her eyes flashing. "Don't pretend this is a gift. You're buying me." He didn't deny it. "I'm buying your time. What you choose to do with it is yours." His calm tone unsettled her more than anger would have. She walked quickly to the bathroom and gripped the edge of the sink, staring at her, Reflection. Her lips trembled, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights, her face pale with fear. She whispered to herself, one night for her life. Just one night. When she stepped back out, she wore one of his crisp white shirts that hung loosely on her slender frame. Nathaniel's eyes flickered, a softness breaking through his composure. That's mine, he remarked quietly. My dress was ruined, she muttered, tugging at the hem. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. His gaze searched her face, lingering on the fear and defiance that battled in her eyes. How much do you want? He asked suddenly. I can give you more than 100,000. Emma's eyes widened in panic. No, don't insult me. I'll take what was agreed and nothing more. For the first time, Nathaniel's expression wavered. He studied her carefully, as if trying to understand why she clung so fiercely to her dignity when she had already sacrificed so much. If you're uncomfortable, you can leave, he said quietly. I will not force you. Emma's heart pounded. His words should have freed her, but the image of her mother's frail body, her failing heart, anchored her in place. Her voice trembled as she whispered, I'm not uncomfortable, I'll stay. The silence between them grew heavy. Nathaniel lifted his hand and tilted her chin gently upward, his touch warm and steady. He lowered his lips to hers, a kiss that began as a transaction, but deepened with unexpected heat. Emma froze, her body stiff with pride clawing to resist, yet as his mouth moved against hers, something cracked inside her. The closeness she had been starved of, the warmth she had long buried, surged through her veins. Her trembling hands gripped the fabric of his shirt as she returned the kiss with shy uncertainty. Nathaniel pulled her closer, his control slipping. For him, this had been meant as business, nothing more. Yet the taste of her innocence stirred emotions he had not felt in years. He lifted her effortlessly and carried her to the wide bed draped in silk sheets. Emma's heart raced, shame and desperation colliding with a fragile yearning she could not silence. Tears burned her eyes as she whispered, Forgive me, Mom. I'm doing this for you. The night unfolded in silence, broken only by the rhythm of their hearts and breaths tangled in shadows. Emma gave herself not to passion but to necessity, yet beneath her fear flickered a tenderness neither of them expected. When dawn broke, pale light spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. Emma stirred beneath the cool silk sheets, her body heavy, her heart pounding with the memory of what she had given away. She turned her head and saw Nathaniel standing on the balcony, already dressed in a dark suit, his posture composed as if the night had meant nothing. Shame flushed through her as she hurried to gather her clothes. She buttoned his shirt tightly around her trembling frame and whispered, I should go. I have class. I have work. Nathaniel's eyes remained steady on her. You're leaving without breakfast. You're still weak. She shook her head, firmly. This was a transaction, it's over. His gaze narrowed slightly, but he didn't stop her. Emma clutched her bag and walked quickly to the door, every step heavy with the weight of what she had surrendered. In her mind, she repeated the vow again and again. It was only one night. I will forget it. I must forget it. Yet as the elevator doors closed in front of her, her chest ached with a pain she could not name, a whisper of truth she refused to admit, that the night had already changed everything. The next morning, Emma arrived at the hospital, her legs trembling as she approached the billing office, ready to beg once more for more time. But before she could speak, the clerk smiled and handed her a receipt. The surgery has been covered in full. Your mother is already in the operating room. Relief crashed over Emma so hard her knees almost buckled. She clutched the paper, with trembling hands, tears filling her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, though she knew who had paid. Only one man could have done it. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall of the corridor and wept quietly, gratitude and humiliation warring inside her. Days later, Margaret Collins was moved to recovery. Her chest rose and fell steadily, her face no longer the pale gray of despair. Emma sat by her side, holding her hand and whispering, You're safe now, Mom. I kept my promise. But in her heart she felt hollow. She had saved her mother's life, but lost something she could never reclaim. Back on campus, the whispers began. Students leaned against lockers, their voices sharp with gossip. Did you hear? The poor girl has a billionaire sponsor. I wonder what she gave him in return. Some laughed openly, pointing at her worn clothes. She probably sold herself for tuition. Emma kept her head down, her cheeks burning, her nails digging into her palms. She refused to answer, but silence did not protect her from the sting of their words. The cruelest voice came from Victoria Hale, the senator's daughter and the reigning queen of campus. With her perfect hair and flawless designer dress, she cornered Emma outside the lecture hall. So you're the charity case Nathaniel Hayes picked up? Victoria sneered, her voice loud enough for everyone around to hear. Do you think wearing his money makes you special? You'll never belong in his world. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Emma's throat tightened, but she lifted her chin. Her voice was low, steady. I don't need to belong to your world, I only need to save mine. Victoria smirked, her eyes gleaming with cruelty. Poor girls like you always think love is charity. You'll see what happens when he grows bored. Emma walked away quickly, her body trembling, but the poison of those words clung to her. That evening she sat alone in the library, textbooks open in front of her, though the words blurred together. The sound of footsteps drew closer and a familiar voice spoke her name. She turned slowly, her breath catching. Nathaniel Hayes stood in the aisle, tall, immaculate, impossible to ignore. Students nearby whispered excitedly. What is he doing here? Why is he looking at her? Emma's heart sank. He was not supposed to come back. It was supposed to have been one night, one deal, nothing more. But now he stood before her, his eyes locked on hers as if she was the only person in the room. She gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady herself. Why are you here? She asked tightly. Nathaniel did not look away. Because you didn't answer my calls. Because I'm not finished with you. Emma's chest constricted, panic rising. No, we had an agreement, it's over. Nathaniel stepped closer, his expression unreadable, his voice firm. It won't be over until I say it is. For days, Emma tried to avoid him. She slipped into crowded hallways, left classrooms before the lecture ended, and chose longer routes across campus just to escape the chance of crossing his path. But no matter how far she went, Nathaniel's presence seemed to follow her. His tall figure appeared near the library steps. His shadow lingered against corridor walls, his gaze never wavering. The more she ran, the more trapped she felt. Fury mixed with fear, shame tangled with an ache she refused to acknowledge. She told herself it had been a transaction, nothing more, but his persistence unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. One afternoon, she visited the hospital to see her mother, only to be told that her outstanding bills had been cleared again. Not only the surgery, but weeks of medication and private care had been paid in advance. Emma froze, her heart pounding with rage. She stormed out of the hospital and nearly collided with Nathaniel, who stood near his car, waiting. You, she hissed, her eyes blazing. Why are you doing this? His gaze was calm. Because you need it. Because she needs it. Emma's fists clenched, her voice breaking. Do you think I'm some project you can fix with money? Do you think you can buy my pride? My life? For the first time, his tone softened, though his eyes remained steady. This isn't charity. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't walk away. Emma's breath caught, a painful knot forming in her chest. She shook her head quickly, desperate to escape before he saw her tears. Don't say that, she whispered. You don't know what you're doing to me. She turned away, determined not to let him see her break. But his voice followed, firm and low. Emma, this is more than a deal. Her steps faltered, but she did not look back. The next morning in class, the whispers grew sharper. Students had seen Nathaniel's car outside the hospital, had seen him walking with her. They muttered cruel names under their breath. Mistress, gold digger, opportunist. Emma sat stiffly, her nails digging into her palms, refusing to cry in front of them. Across the room, Victoria Hale smirked, her triumphant eyes glittering as if she had already won. After the lecture, Emma packed her books quickly, but before she could leave, Nathaniel appeared in the doorway. The room fell silent. Every student's eyes turned to her as his voice carried across the hall. Emma. Her stomach dropped. She forced herself to walk past him without speaking, but he reached out and brushed her arm. His voice was quiet, meant only for her. Meet me tonight. She jerked her arm away, her chest heaving. No. This has to stop. For a moment, anger flashed in his eyes, but it faded into something else, something almost vulnerable. Then, he stepped aside and let her pass. Emma hurried away, her body trembling, her heart torn between fury and confusion. She told herself it was the end, but deep inside she knew it was only the beginning of a storm neither of them could control. Emma finished her piano shift late one evening, her body aching from hours of playing, her mind heavy with exhaustion. The night air outside was cool, and for a brief moment she felt relief that the world was quiet. She walked down the narrow street behind the lounge, clutching her worn bag to her chest. Suddenly, a van screeched to a halt beside her. The door slid open before she could scream, and rough hands dragged her inside. A cloth pressed against her mouth, the sharp stench of chemicals flooding her senses, and darkness swallowed her. When she awoke, her wrists were bound, the air thick with sweat and fear. She wasn't alone. Several other young women sat huddled, together, their eyes wide with terror. Whispers filled the room. They're going to sell us. Emma's stomach twisted violently, her heart pounding harder as heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. The door burst open and masked men barked orders, dragging the women into a larger chamber lit by harsh white lights. Emma stumbled forward, until she stood under the cold gaze of strangers seated behind polished tables. An auctioneer's voice rang out, merciless and sharp. Fresh, young. We start at $500,000. Numbers rose quickly, the crowd roaring with greed. Emma's vision blurred with horror as the bids climbed higher and higher. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her throat. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow until suddenly a commanding voice cut through the chaos. $3 million. Silence fell instantly. Every head turned. At the back of the room stood Nathaniel Hayes, tall and imposing, his dark suit immaculate, his eyes blazing with fury. The auctioneer hesitated before slamming the gavel. Sold! Chaos erupted as Nathaniel's bodyguards stormed the chamber, shoving the masked men aside. Rough ropes were cut from Emma's wrists and strong hands guided her out through a hidden passage. She stumbled into a quiet lounge, her knees buckling as fear and shock threatened to crush her. Then she saw him. Nathaniel crossed the room in long strides, his expression carved from steel and relief. He caught her trembling body in his arms, his grip firm, his voice raw as he whispered, "You're safe now." Tears streamed down Emma's cheeks as she clutched his jacket. "You paid $3 million for me," she sobbed. His eyes locked with hers, fierce and unyielding. "I would have paid more. For you, I would pay the world." Emma's throat tightened, gratitude and fear colliding inside her. She wanted to push him away, to scream at him for pulling her into a world where such horrors existed. But her body betrayed her. For one fleeting moment, she leaned into his warmth, allowing herself to feel safe. Nathaniel stroked her hair, his voice low and steady. "This was Michael's doing. He has been my rival for years, waiting for any weakness. He saw you and he struck." Emma shivered at the name. "So it was never about me," she whispered bitterly. "I was just a weapon to hurt you." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, his tone firm. "That doesn't change what you mean to me." Emma pulled back, anguish filling her eyes. "That is exactly why I cannot stay near you. Your world is poison. If being close to you puts my life at risk, then I need to leave." Her words cracked, but her resolve held strong. She turned, her tears blurring the golden light of the lounge, and walked away. Nathaniel stood frozen, his fists clenched, his heart pounding with fear that this time she truly meant it. Days passed, but Emma could not erase the memory of her abduction or the way Nathaniel had appeared like a storm to rescue her. She threw herself into caring for her mother, spending long hours at the hospital, adjusting pillows, changing water in vases, reading softly to fill the silence. Margaret grew stronger, her breathing steadier, her color slowly returning, but Emma's heart remained heavy with turmoil. One afternoon, while arranging flowers by the window, she overheard two nurses speaking in the hallway. "Did you know? One of the hospital's benefactors was treated here years ago," one said. "His father was terribly ill, and there was a young nurse who devoted herself completely to his care." The other nurse nodded. Her name was Margaret Collins, if I remember right. She saved lives when no one else would, including Nathaniel Hayes' father. Emma froze, the vase nearly slipping from her hands. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She rushed into the hall demanding, "What did you just say?" The nurses exchanged startled looks, then repeated the name. Margaret Collins. Yes, she had been the nurse who saved Nathaniel Hayes' father. Emma stumbled back into the room, her thoughts spinning. That evening, Nathaniel appeared at the hospital. His presence filled the quiet corridor, his dark eyes locked on hers. Emma glared at him, her voice sharp. "Why are you here again? You should let me go." He stepped closer, his voice lower than she had ever heard. "Because I found something you need to know." He handed her an old file. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a note written in a man's uneven handwriting. "She saved my son's life during the accident. Never forget this debt." It was signed by Nathaniel's father. Emma gasped, her body shaking. Memories stirred in Nathaniel's eyes as he spoke quietly. "I was only a child, but I remember falling into the lake near our estate. I was drowning. It was your mother who pulled me out. Your mother saved me, Emma." Her eyes filled with tears. "All this time, we were connected." Nathaniel's voice cracked, his composure breaking. "That's why I felt it the moment I saw you. It wasn't chance. It was fate." Emma pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed. She wanted to deny it, to escape the destiny unraveling before her, but the truth wrapped around her heart like a chain she couldn't break. That night, she wandered the hospital corridors, unable to sleep, torn between gratitude for Nathaniel's past and terror of what his presence meant for her future. She told herself she couldn't afford to be tangled with him, that his world was too ruthless, too dangerous, but the pull between them was undeniable. When Margaret was finally strong enough to sit up, she looked at her daughter with weary, yet knowing eyes. "Emma," she said softly, "sometimes fate doesn't ask for permission. Sometimes it simply brings two people together because it must." Emma shook her head, tears brimming. "But Mom, his family will never accept me. His life will destroy mine." Margaret squeezed her hand gently. "Love is never safe, but neither is life." Emma made her decision. The revelation about her mother shook her deeply, but instead of pulling her closer to Nathaniel, it convinced her she had to step away. She left him a note at the hospital, her handwriting simple but firm. "Thank you for everything, but I cannot be part of your world. Please let me go." Then she disappeared from campus and threw herself into long shifts at the cafe and the lounge, determined to carry the smaller burdens on her own. But distance did not silence the whispers. Victoria Hale made sure of that. She flaunted her presence. Beside Nathaniel at public events, her perfect photographs splashed across social media. Her glittering gowns displayed as proof that she belonged at his side. "The Hayes family is finally making a proper match," she declared in interviews, feeding rumors that a marriage was being arranged. Emma told herself she didn't care, but each headline felt like a blade. The night of the charity gala arrived, one of the grandest events of the season. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, filled with dignitaries, tycoons, and flashing cameras. Emma stood outside on the street, drawn there against her will by a pain she couldn't suppress. Through the wide glass windows, she saw Nathaniel, in his tailored black suit, Victoria on his arm, dazzling in red. They smiled together beneath the chandeliers, and the sight cut through her chest like fire. She turned to leave, her heart aching, when a murmur swept across the ballroom. Nathaniel had stepped onto the stage. He adjusted the microphone with steady hands, his voice carrying across the glittering hall. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Before we begin, I have an announcement." The crowd hushed instantly. Whispers of engagement swirled. Victoria's smile widened, her confidence shining like a crown. Nathaniel's gaze swept across the sea of faces, and his voice hardened like steel. "For weeks there have been rumors about my future, about a marriage arranged for influence and wealth. Let me make this clear. I will not marry Victoria Hale." Gasps erupted. Cameras flashed wildly. Victoria's face went pale, her smile collapsing into fury. Nathaniel stood unwavering, his voice steady and firm. "I do not care for power without love. There is only one woman I will spend my life with. Her name is Emma Collins. She is the woman I love." The ballroom exploded into chaos. Some applauded, some shouted questions. Reporters surged forward. Victoria stormed from the stage, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. Outside on the street, Emma stood frozen beneath a street lamp, tears spilling down her cheeks. He had said her name. He had chosen her in front of the world. Moments later, the ballroom doors burst open and Nathaniel strode into the night, his eyes searching wildly until they found her. Ignoring the cameras, he walked toward her with determined steps. When he reached her, he took her hand firmly. His voice was fierce. "No more running. You are mine, and I am yours. Nothing else matters." Emma trembled, her lips parting, her breath unsteady. "But your family," she whispered. "They will never accept me." At the doorway of the ballroom, his mother stood, pale with shock, her eyes filled with judgment. But Nathaniel pulled Emma closer, his voice blazing with conviction. "Then they will learn, because I will never let you go." In the weeks after the gala, the storm began to settle. Emma returned to the hospital each day, her heart finally able to breathe as she watched her mother recover. Margaret's cheeks grew rosier, her laughter returned in fragments, and the doctors called it remarkable, a recovery beyond their expectations. Emma sat at her bedside, feeding her soup, smoothing the blankets, her eyes filled with quiet relief. One morning, Margaret caught her wrist gently and whispered, "Do not hide from happiness, Emma. Life has tested you enough. When love comes, you must let it heal you." Emma pressed her forehead against her mother's hand, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, knowing her mother's words carried more weight than she wanted to admit. That evening, Nathaniel invited her to a private dinner high above the city. The restaurant sparkled with candlelight, violins whispering in the background, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Emma wore a simple dress borrowed from a friend, yet in Nathaniel's eyes she looked radiant. He poured her water himself, a gesture that startled her more than the glittering diamonds scattered across the tables. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly, her voice unsteady. "Why me?" Nathaniel set his glass down, his eyes never leaving hers. Then he stood and walked around the table. "Because you are my beginning and my end," he said. "You were in my past through your mother's kindness. You are in my present through fate's cruelty, and I want you in my future by choice." He knelt before her, pulling out a velvet box. The room seemed to pause, candle flames flickering. Gently as his voice lowered, "You were my sacrifice, my fate, and my healing. Will you marry me?" Emma's hands flew to her mouth, her breath catching as tears filled her eyes. She had imagined this moment only in dreams, but never with such weight, never with such sincerity. Her voice broke as she nodded. "Yes, Nathaniel, I will." Applause erupted across the restaurant, strangers celebrating as he slipped the ring onto her trembling finger. Nathaniel pulled her into his arms, their kiss tender yet fierce, a promise sealed not by desperation or money, but by love. For the first time, Emma believed in the possibility of a future where she was no longer running, no longer begging, no longer lost. For the first time, she believed she could truly be loved. Weeks later, the small chapel overflowed with flowers and soft music. Margaret Collins sat in the front row, her smile brighter than the sunlight streaming through the stained glass. Her eyes glistened with tears as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle, dressed in white, her step steady, her heart racing toward the man waiting at the altar. Nathaniel Hayes stood tall, his eyes fixed on Emma as though she were the only person in the world. For once his sharp composure softened into something vulnerable, something real. When she reached him, he took her hands in his voice steady as he spoke his vows. From the moment fate brought you into my life, you became the only choice I ever wanted to make. I will stand by you, protect you, and love you until my last breath. Emma's voice trembled as she answered, her heart overflowing. I thought I had to fight alone. I thought love was beyond my reach, but you showed me that love can be stronger than fear, stronger than pride. I give myself to you, Nathaniel, completely and forever. The vows were sealed with a kiss that carried the weight of everything they had endured, a kiss that spoke of sacrifice, healing, and the promise of a life built together. Applause rose around them, yet in that moment they heard nothing but the beating of each other's hearts. Margaret whispered softly from the front row, her hands clasped. Thank you for giving her the happiness I could not. As they walked out of the chapel hand in hand, sunlight washed over them. They were no longer the billionaire and the poor student, no longer two worlds colliding, but two souls who had survived fire and chosen to heal together. Emma closed her eyes and felt the weight of her past lifting. She had endured hunger, humiliation, heartbreak, and sacrifice. But love had grown from that pain. In Nathaniel's arms, she finally found a place where she was safe, cherished, and whole. Together they stepped into their new life, bound not by wealth or desperation, but by a love that had conquered everything in its path.